Chapter 5. How does electricity act upon vegetation? Before speculating concerning the rationale of the action of electricity upon the growth of plants, it may be helpful to review, even very briefly, the manner in which plants get their nutrition from the air and soil. The atmosphere is a mixture of 1/5 oxygen and 4/5 nitrogen, with varying percentages of carbon dioxide and vapor of water. Besides minute quantities of a few other compounds, the leaves of plants have the power of breaking up the carbon dioxide and fixing its carbon, at the same time setting free its oxygen. This disintegrating action upon the carbon dioxide in woodlands is performed on such a large scale that sufficient oxygen is liberated to produce the exhilarating feeling one often experiences during an outing in the woods. This appropriation of carbon from carbon dioxide goes on when two conditions coexist: sunlight and the presence of chlorophyll in the leaves. To properly appreciate the value of sunlight to vegetation, one must realize that it not only enables the chlorophyll to decompose carbon dioxide, but also that it is the stimulus which empowers vegetation to make chlorophyll, the constituents to which plants owe their various hues of green. It is well known that a period of rainy weather with the absence of sunlight diminishes very much the quantity of chlorophyll in plants. Also that in dark cellars they lose it entirely, and as a consequence their lives, though an abundance of carbon dioxide be present. From the soil, plants get most of their water and nearly all of their nitrogen, so very important to their well-being, besides the various salts of potash, lime, etc., which they require. Most of these substances exist in the soil in forms which can be absorbed readily by the roots. This is not the case, however, with nitrogen, so we offer a few words concerning it. Nitrogen is an inert gas, colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It will neither burn nor support combustion, and yet it is indispensable to life, not only in plants but in human beings. Although it is so abundant in the air, simply mixed with oxygen, neither plants nor human beings are able to appropriate it directly from the atmosphere. It seems necessary that it should first be made into compounds before plants can utilize it. These compounds are generally formed by oxygen and hydrogen uniting with it under certain conditions: nitrous acid and nitric acid, nitrous acid and nitric. Nitrous acid and nitric acid are examples. Usually compounds of nitrogen are produced by the decomposition of organic matter by ferments. Thus prepared, they are taken up readily by plants and made a part of them. However, the roots of some plants, under rare conditions, seem able to appropriate directly the nitrogen brought to them in the air, which has been absorbed by rainwater. Leguminous plants are fortunate in this respect. An example will be given later. Concerning the manner in which the electric light helps plants to grow, experimenters have given us some valuable information. But in relation to the action of the current itself upon vegetation, much needs to be learned. And here's an inviting field for the microscopist, as well as for the chemist. The light furnished by electricity acts upon plants in a manner very similar to sunlight. It stimulates the formation of chlorophyll and assists in the decomposition of carbon dioxide, upon which plants feed so largely. That it helps in the formation of starch in the leaves can be proved in a very interesting manner. Keep a plant in darkness for several days so that the starch may disappear from its leaves. Then cover one of its leaves with a piece of tinfoil and cut a letter or figure through the foil without injuring the leaf. Expose the leaf to the electric light, which will stimulate the production of starch in the part of the leaf which it reaches through the perforations in the tinfoil. After a couple of days, pluck the leaf and at once put it into boiling water to render the starch soluble, and then into alcohol to dissolve out the chlorophyll. The leaf will now be colorless, but will contain dissolved starch in the parts which were exposed to the electric light. To render this visible, immerse the leaf in a weak solution of iodine, and the letter or figure will stand out in a blue color. In considering the action of atmospheric electricity upon vegetation, we have to deal with the stimulus which exists in abundance. Plants grow most vigorously where it is most abundant and with greatest rapidity in the early morning when the dew is more plentiful upon them, making them better conductors. Its most important action upon the stalks of plants is that of increasing their circulation of sap. Discharges of electricity in the air, especially during thunderstorms, cause some union between the oxygen and nitrogen in the vicinity of the discharges, forming oxides of nitrogen, which, being soluble in water, are carried to the roots of plants and absorbed by them directly. Electricity passed through the soil by earth batteries, the geomagnetiphers, or other means has some action upon its chemical constituents. We are familiar with the effects of a current of electricity upon water when the electrodes of a battery are placed in it. From each molecule of water, 2 atoms of hydrogen go to the negative electrode and 1 atom of oxygen to the positive. Since the time when Davy decomposed the alkalis, since the time when Davy decomposed the alkalis, soda, and potash by means of electricity, nearly every compound is yielded to this mysterious power, which, as it were, shakes their molecules until the atoms composing them fly apart. In like manner, currents of electricity may break up the more complex compounds in the soil into simpler ones, upon which the roots of plants can feed. Spechnu found that 100 pounds of earth subjected to the electrical current for a certain length of time contained 1 ounce of soluble material, while a similar quantity of the same kind of earth not so treated contained but half an ounce. Some observers believe that electricity decomposes the constituents of the soil much as quicklime does, and it is largely on the account that plants are more richly fed in electrified earth. Others think that in some manner, under the electric influence, nitrogen from the air combines with some other substances in the soil, making compounds which are readily absorbed by roots of plants. A recent experimenter claims that the particles of electrified earth are set into molecular vibration, thus loosening the earth. Faraday, in his researches many years ago, declared that plants requiring much nitrogen for their development would be benefited by being grown in electrified earth. Let us consider how uncombined nitrogen in the soil carried there by the water may be given to the roots of plants without first being formed into compounds. We will state the case of one of the leguminous plants, which plants find nitrogen so very necessary to their existence. It is well known that many of the legumes can sustain themselves in soils too poor in nitrogenous compounds to support other plants. It is well known that many of the legumes can sustain themselves in soils too poor in nitrogenous compounds to support other plants. They seem to do so by feeding directly upon the nitrogen brought to them from the air by rainwater, and this by the aid of certain bacteria at their roots. On the roots of the pea, for instance, we often find numerous tubercles. These used to be thought to be evidence of disease, and the microscope seemed to corroborate this by showing them to be filled with microorganisms. However, it was soon ascertained that instead of causing harm to the pea plants, these colonies of bacteria contributed very largely to their welfare. They actually fed the plants with nitrogen through the roots. If peas are planted in a soil which has been washed and calcined to deprive it of its nitrogenous compounds, they will soon become sickly and die. But if some water is made muddy with a little soil in which healthy peas are growing and soaked to their roots, they become healthy and thereafter flourish. The water carries to their roots some of the bacteria from the ground in which the healthy peas are growing. These microorganisms attach themselves to the roots, and while living in a measure upon the nutrition in them, more than pay for what they eat by giving to the plants through their roots quantities of nitrogen, taken in some mysterious manner from the air brought to the soil by the water. Let us wonder if electricity may not help in this manner by stimulating the activity of these bacteria, for it is said to favor very much the growth of peas when applied to the soil. Before directing our attention to the question of the action of electricity upon bacteria, let us notice the offices of some other bacteria in the soil. Organic matter containing nitrogen, such as manure, is converted by fermentation into ammonical compounds by one kind of microorganisms in the soil. These compounds are oxidized into nitrates, and by another kind of nitrates are raised to nitrates. Nitrites are raised by one kind of microorganisms in the soil. These compounds are oxidized into nitrites, and by another kind, the nitrites are raised to nitrates, ready for absorption by the roots of plants. Both organisms are found in all good soils, and the future farmers may sow them in bad soils, not forgetting to sow with them some phosphates and sulfates, etc., as foods for the microorganisms themselves. Here, as very frequently elsewhere, man is dependent upon bacteria for some of the good things in life. In these days of sepsis, when the tendency is to sterilize everything, especially our foods, it may soften our animosity towards the disease-producing microorganisms to reflect that there are many of their kin which are friendly to us. Delicate flowers given to butter and to cheese are the results of their action. Even the process of digestion is probably dependent in a manner upon them. But what has electricity to do with the action of bacteria in feeding atmospheric nitrogen to the roots of plants? And what with their action in decomposing ammoniacal salts, finally into soluble nitrates, ready for absorption by the plants. And what with their action in decomposing ammoniacal salts, finally into soluble nitrates, ready for absorption by the plants. Does electricity stimulate the functions of the bacteria? A current of electricity passes through water containing certain freely floating organisms, causes them to take notice of the fact and accommodate themselves to it. Dr. Waller has shown that a vessel of water with paramecia plentifully inhabiting it is curiously affected if a current of electricity is passing through it. The minute organisms at once form in line and rush towards the negative electrode, and if the current is reversed, hastened the other way. One might think that the current drives the minute organisms with it, as it does some chemicals in cataphoresis. But strange to say, other microorganisms swim, as it were, against the current. The Arsonville insists that electricity of high potential has a definite effect upon microorganisms, and his remarkable experiment with the Bacillus pyocinius, which caused it to change the color of its secretive pigment, is much in evidence. And then we know of the stimulating influence of thunderstorms upon fermentive germs, for instance upon the lactic ferment, causing it to turn milk sour more quickly. We think we have sufficient knowledge of the effect of electricity upon the cells of complex man to warrant us in believing that it does favor their nutrition. Why not infer that it has a like action upon the cells of plants, and also upon the function of the bacteria concerned in feeding nitrogen to plants? In these early days of the X-rays of Roentgen, let us wonder what effect they may have not only on plants above the soil, but especially on the roots and bacteria in the soil, which soil the rays can penetrate to a considerable depth. So far, experiments have not been conclusive. Professor Atkinson states that while plant tissues absorb the Roentgen rays quite freely, there is no marked influence on the growing parts, and also that bacteria are negatively affected. Other experimenters report that exposure of the Bacillus prodigius to the radiations of an X-ray focused tube induces very marked increase of growth and peculiar changes in the pigment forming powers of this particular microorganism. Similar changes were noted in some of the lower forms of vegetable life, notably in the Protococcus